Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black Literature, Black History. This is Jason Williams, and tonight we're going to continue to discuss Wallace Thurman's Infants of the Spring. Now, in this book, the main character, Raymond, is Wallace Thurman. And Wallace Thurman is the narrator of the story, which in turn is Raymond, but not exactly. But the narrator introduces each one of these characters. He gives a little bit of background of the characters and what each one of these characters is about, their flaws and their mistakes, their flaws. And then Raymond, through his interactions with these characters, which is the crew that he runs with, in bursts of drunkenness or bursts of anger, he reveals to these characters face to face his thoughts, his feelings, his perceptions, which are in line with the narrator, which is Wallace Thurman. And from reading this book now, because I read it many years ago, and I remember that I enjoyed the book many years ago when I read it, but I never really discussed it or looked at it deep like we're doing now. I never walked through the book, and I'm noticing that this book is all about looking at yourself in the company that you keep. We all heard the saying, birds of a feather flock together. And Raymond's dilemma is that he is very critical of each one of his friends. He has negative criticisms about each one of his friends. And at the beginning of the book, he gives these criticisms real nonchalant, and then he continues with it. But now he's starting to give these criticisms, and then he's looking at it as, these are the people that I'm running with. So as he's criticizing these people now, he's reflecting on his own flaws. He's like, if I'm criticizing this, and if I'm criticizing that, and I'm criticizing him and her and what they think, is their way of thinking any different than my way of thinking? Because these are my friends, these are my associates, these are the people that I live with. So he starts to criticize, again, in fits of rage, because there's some fights, and in drunkenness. So that those kind of give Raymond an out, because his friend, he can have these conflicts and then turn around and say, well, his friends will say, well, you were drunk at this moment, or you were mad at this moment, and then they reconcile so the story can continue instead of just breaking it off. So Raymond is starting to look at his criticisms of his friends as a reflection on himself. Now, where we left off last time was a discussion of, in the book, there's a discussion of these interracial relationships. And one of the characters, named Lucille, she reveals to Raymond that she's in love with Stephen. And Stephen is the immigrant from Denmark, and he has hooked up with a woman named Eileen, which we'll discuss what's going on there later, because Eileen is black but she looks white, which was revealed later on in the story. But Lucille declares to Raymond that she's in love with Stephen. And Raymond tells Lucille the only reason why you like Raymond is because he's white. And then she's like, no, I never fell for a white man before. There's something different about Stephen. And Raymond tells Lucille, yeah, the only difference about Stephen is that he's white and he's not black, and you just like him because he's white. So they have their little discussion, little discourse and disagreements. And then when they part, Lucille, before they part, Lucille says, well, what about Barbara? You just like her because she's white. And then he reflects on that after they part. And I'd like to read to you what he says. And then I'm going to read to you what Barbara herself says. Because when I read this book years ago, I remember the discussion that was taking place about how black people received white women in the community once they were rejected, once the white woman was rejected from her own community. But I forgot that actually in this book, Barbara herself is being really upfront with Raymond Ray, that this is the case. She tells him direct. It was her words. You know, I reconstructed in my mind as the narrator, because you know the narrator gives most of the backgrounds, but as I read it again, it's actually Barbara herself who realizes how she's revered in the black community more than she is in the white community. And she tells him why she's running with black people. But back to where Lucille and Raymond part, and then Raymond reflects on himself. And I'm going to start where Lucille tells Ray that she's serious. It is serious, Ray. I have never fell for a white man before. Eileen has. But Steve's the first one for me, and I'd give anything to have him. Just because he's white, he remembered Lucille's similar assertion. His words were sharp and scornful. It's not that, Ray. She was trying hard to make him understand. It's just that he's different. Different from Negroes. He has white skin. It's a badge of honor for you you'd like to wear. Jesus, you Negro women are as bad as Negro men. Tears receded. The eyes flashed angrily. I don't see where you got any right to talk. What about Barbara? She's not white, I suppose. Well, what about her? We're good friends, yes. Good friends, yeah, I know. So are Steve and Eileen, good friends. The little whore. But I'll show her. She can't keep him. I ain't yaller, which I'm not yellow, but I can get a white man, same as she. So then, it goes down further, and then it says, Raymond thought of all this now, thought of the gay comradeship which had developed between them, and wondered momentarily if he too was similar to the other Negroes he knew, who deemed it such an honor to possess a white woman. No, he was not like that. White people to him were no novelty. So then he goes on to try to convince himself that he doesn't hold Barbara and white women on a pedestal like his friends and other black people do. And you know that once you start having these conversations with yourself, that you know that just by you asking that question, that part of you does acknowledge. That's kind of acknowledging that you do hold those characteristics, because if you didn't, you wouldn't even be questioning that. And he's questioning that. And the reason why he's questioning that, and he knows that he does hold her up, is because when Barbara was introduced to him, Paul, his friend Paul, who makes everything flamboyant, Paul was the one that had the discussion about he has had relationships with women and men romantically, but he introduced Barbara as a countess. So Raymond held that countess in esteem, and Samuel, his other white friend, told Raymond, like, she's not a countess. She's just an ordinary white woman. She's not a countess. However, even with this knowledge, Raymond still viewed her as some type of royalty, as a countess, even when he knew that she wasn't. So then, here's the part I want to read to you where Barbara talks to Raymond, and she's just very upfront. She had been surprisingly frank with Raymond. The title and everything is a joke, Ray. Someone called me that the first night I attended a Harlem party and didn't want to give my right name. I have been known as the Countess ever since. That is funny. It's funnier than you think. I heard you arguing with Samuel about Negroes the other day, and it reminded me of a number of things. Have you seen the Harlem news this week? Yes. Did you notice how my name was flung all over the society page? I never read that junk. Well, the Countess was here, and the Countess was there. It's beginning to get awful. Don't you enjoy it? I'm not entirely a rat, Ray. I do have some feeling, even though I couldn't very well give up a profitable living. I don't get the connection. Well, I have to live. I'm washed up downtown. The more so since I've come to Harlem. And I can get better treatment and more money from colored men than I could ever make downtown with my limited looks and lack of any special ability to put me in the limelight. When I first came up here, I enjoyed it. Everybody made a fuss over me, but now it makes me sad. Why? I see through it all. It's tragic to realize that your Negro men are all so eager to possess a white woman, no matter what her antecedents or present condition. And I'm not talking about the lowbrows, men like Bull, for instance, who just take you casually as they would any woman, then bid you goodbye, even though they may brag for months afterwards. No, I'm talking about your professional men, your doctors, lawyers, dentists, businessmen, and social service workers, especially the latter. They do so much yelping about racial injustice and for racial solidarity, and then when someone like me comes along and gives them the glad eye, they fall over one another in the rush. It's tragic. Much more disgusting than tragic, Barbara. But why the hell should you care? If you don't string them along, someone else will. If they want to dine and wine and tip you silver, let them. I hope you bleed them well, then write your reminiscences. Barbara's revelations were not new to Raymond. He had observed similar antics ever since his arrival in Harlem and had laughed about them. But when women he knew intimately began to fight over his best friend merely because he was a white man, well, as Stephen had said, there seemed to be no end to the complexes Negroes had managed to store within themselves. He was still sitting as Janet had left him, the book review temporarily forgotten when Stephen sauntered into the room. So, like Barbara, just straightforward, she's white and she realized the treatment that she gets from black men compared to what she gets in the white society. And she noticed that she said even more so after she started hanging out in Harlem. Once the white men and the white society saw that she was hanging around colored people or black people, they just, they outcasted her from society. Which brings me to another point. So, another discussion that happened in this book. Stephen is dating Eileen. And towards the end of the chapter that I read, one of the characters was accused of rape, and when the police came to the door to pick up the guy because they had a warrant for his arrest, the police started questioning Steve, and they were like, "Are you white?" And He's like, yes, I'm white. And they're like, well, what are you doing here? And they pointed at Ali and they said, is she white? And he instinctively said yes, because he knew that this officer didn't actually know that she was black, but he asked, he asked, is she white? And then Stephen said yes, so the officer was fine with that. And then he took Pelham, their friend, he arrested him. But that brings me to another point. Like, Stephen is fascinated by these black people in Harlem. He wants to hang, he had the discussion with Samuel about he doesn't see color the way that Samuel sees it, because he's from Denmark and they don't have the same history, they don't have the same view when it comes to color. So, but if Eileen looks white, that happens today. Many people will choose someone who looks white but is not actually white to say that they're not with a white person. Like, people who, like, it's funny how Barbara said, like these, what we would call these men in the conscious community, talk about racial injustice, white supremacy, and in this book they call it Nordic supremacy, which is discussed very deeply in this book, but then turn around and date a white woman. But then you have those who do preach that, and they date the lightest or the whitest person that they could find. And I have met women who know this. Like, when you're doing this and you're dating these women and you're trying to say she's not white, the woman knows what's going on, because I have met Latinas and other women who say that they know that they look white, and they were being really frank and upfront with me. They say, I know I look white. The only reason why people know that I'm not white is because I'll tell them that I'm not white, but I know that I'm the girl that they can date and get their white woman, but not necessarily a Nordic white woman. So guys that do this, the woman that you're dating, she knows it, and everybody around that looks at you, they know it. And these discussions are still happening today. I just found that funny when they revealed that Eileen was white enough that the officer asked if she's white, and Stephen said, yes, she's white, and the officer accepted. And I'm like, okay, so Stephen is with all these black people, and he's trying to embrace them. However, the one that he's romantically involved with, she looks white. But he's satisfied because she's not American white. Because in America, in order to be considered white, you have to be 100%, or your black heritage has to be unknown. And like I said, in this book, they talk about white supremacy, and that happened. There was a discussion of white supremacy when Raymond got into an argument with Samuel. So Raymond, one of the characters, I don't know, his name is Eustace. He read a poem by Langston Hughes, and it was about a yellow bastard son. Samuel remarked, like, that was a terrible poem. Why do you black people accept this? And he gave his opinion on what black people should accept and what they shouldn't accept. And Raymond had a few glasses of gin in him. So he started questioning Samuel, and he burst out into Samuel. Now, like I said, the narrator gave us the background of Samuel not being successful in his white society race to be radical and a social justice warrior, but he's more successful around black people. But Raymond confronted him, and he was like, why shouldn't we like this poem? And then he got into Raymond got into Samuel because he's like, you're white, you're hanging around black people, you're doing this and that because you took a few sociology classes, you've done your little radical studies, and you hang around black people, so now you think that you're in a position in Nordic superiority, flexing your white supremacist muscles to tell us what we should enjoy and what we shouldn't enjoy, what we should be proud of and what we shouldn't be proud of. Now, this was one of Langston Hughes' poems. And then he also talks of Raymond, and they talk about Zora Neale Hurston. Yeah, actually, in discussion of this poem and talking about Nordic superiority and Samuel trying to tell black people what they should be proud of and what they shouldn't be proud of, Raymond says, you're just like what Zora Hurston called a Negro-tolarian. And it's a person who speaks for the Negro people, a white person who speaks for the Negro people. And I can't remember exactly what the word is. Let me look for it. Here it is. After Raymond spoke to Samuel, they actually got in a fight because Raymond lost it, threw a drink in Samuel's face, and then he tried to. And when he threw the drink into Samuel's face, Samuel kicked Raymond on the side of the head, and then Bull got up. Who we talked about Bull and how he was going to fight white supremacy by sleeping with as many white women as he could and beating up every white man that he can. As soon as Samuel kicked Raymond in the face, Bull got up and laid him out. And then the next day, Raymond says he deserved it. Damn it, all my patience with him is fretted out. I was probably woozily illogical last night, but as I remember, I gave him a much-deserved tongue lashing. Don't you realize what a pest he and his type are? Zora Hurston has named them Negrotarians, which then analyzed is most apt. So, throughout this book, Raymond and the narrator, they talk about different characters, or not different characters, but different authors and different books. The poem that they read from Langston Hughes was called Fine Clothes to the Jew, Langston Hughes' latest book of poems. I'll go ahead and I'll read that poem.
White man, Georgia dusk and the turpentine woods, one of the pillars of the temple fell. You are my son, like hell. The moon over the turpentine woods, the southern night, full of stars, great big yellow stars. Juicy bodies of nigger wenches, blue-black against black fences. Oh, you little bastard boy, what's a body but a toy? The scent of pine wood in the evening air, a nigger night, a nigger joy, a little yellow bastard boy.
Marvelous, Barbara exclaimed. Now she's the white woman. Disgusting. Samuel shot through compressed lips. Raymond was aroused. How do you disfigure disgusting? It's an insult to any self-respecting Negro. How come? And then this is when Raymond gets into Samuel. Which brings me to another point. Now Raymond enjoys all aspects of the Negro society. And he spoke to Samuel to try to help his friend Eustace, who is I guess he's an okay singer, to get him some type of gig to sing. And Samuel talked to his connects in the white society that he does have, and he got Eustace some gigs. But they wanted Eustace to sing Negro spirituals. And Eustace doesn't want to sing Negro spirituals because he believes that singing Negro spirituals and black music and being put in a box to sing black things is an insult, and he doesn't want to do it. He wants to sing classical music and some white music, which he's not very good at. And Raymond gets upset with Eustace because he's like, why are you ashamed to sing spirituals, to sing black blues and black music? That's us. That's good music. You should be proud to sing it. What's the big deal? If they ask you to sing it, you should be good at it because that's our music. And he said, Raymond said, by having this view and looking down on the things in the black community that black people have created and are good at and continuously do, by rejecting that because it reminds you of, quote, slavery, because Eustace's grandmother or great-grandmother was a slave who sang Negro spirituals. But if it reminds you of some parts in history that are negative, by you frowning upon those creations that came out of that oppression, you are in fact supporting Nordic superiority because you're looking down on creations in the black community, which shouldn't be frowned upon, which shouldn't be looked down upon. They're art forms that you should appreciate as being from the black community. But if you look down on them because they remind you of slavery, because they remind you of oppression, and they make you feel oppressed, and they make you feel bad by looking down upon these powerful creations, you're in fact supporting white supremacy, because that's what they want you to feel. And if you feel that way, then they've succeeded in making you not be proud of who you are and from whence you came, your whole people and your whole origin, as far as in the United States. So that's very interesting. So we're going to continue to look at Infants of the Spring. And this is going to, this is a book of Wallace Thurman examining himself through the people that he ran with, his crew. And I know, and another part, the part where I realized that this is actually Wallace Thurman examining himself is because in the autobiography of Langston Hughes, The Big C, he said that Wallace Thurman was never really satisfied with his own writings, and he published some things that Langston Hughes had written, even though he didn't like Langston Hughes' writings as well. And he told Langston Hughes, the only reason why I'm publishing your writing is because even though I don't like what you wrote, it's tolerable. And he didn't like his own writings. And in this book, Raymond is a writer, and he's questioning his own abilities as a writer. So as he's criticizing all of his friends, I'm sure that's what Wallace Thurman was criticizing, all of his friends. And then he reflected on himself and doubted himself as a writer, which Langston Hughes explained in his autobiography, The Big C, that Wallace Thurman, even though he wrote Blacker the Berry, which we reviewed in my other videos, and he wrote this Infants of the Spring, which I believe is a pretty good piece of writing, he wasn't satisfied with it. And Raymond is a writer. He's writing a fiction book. He writes reviews. He's revered in his group, but he questions himself as a writer. He's not satisfied with what he's producing as well, which is a reflection of Wallace Thurman. So, Infants of the Spring by Wallace Thurman. This is Jason Williams with Black Literature, Black History. Have a nice evening.